All right, here we go. Welcome back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show. I'm Big Doug. That's George Carmi. And our guest today from The Athletic is Ted Nguyen. Ted, how are you?
Doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, man. Excited to have you. First time on the show. Appreciate you having it. We appreciate you coming on with us. When do you think is the first time you recall falling in love with football?
I think in middle school, I don't know how it happened, but I just started watching football on Fox, and slowly just started falling in love with it. And then I started playing football at lunch with my friends, and one of the kids asked me to play Pee Wee football, and played Pee Wee football with him, and went on to play high school football, fell in love with coaching football, and then I got into sports media. So that's kind of how my journey went.
With everybody kind of getting access to more and more film these days, Ted, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make when watching film?
I think the biggest mistake, and I was guilty of this early in my career, and I'm still guilty of it sometimes, is that you think everything is done on purpose. Even in the pros, there's so many mistakes that happen and so many coverages to get blown, or so many accidents that just happen on the field, and people have to react to it. Not everything is coordinated, even in professional football.
And finally, how did you end up at The Athletic?
Well, I was when I first decided to jump into sports media, I was just writing for a bunch of whatever website that would pay me like $20 an article or $50 an article or whatever. And when The Athletic started, Sheil Kapadia, who worked at ESPN for the time, he works for The Ringer now. He followed me for a little while. We never talked, but he visited the Bay Area Athletic. He was one of the first athletic hires, but he went to go visit the Bay Area Athletic, and they were looking for writers, and he recommended, he gave me a big recommendation to Tim Kamikawi, who ran the Bay Area Athletic, and Jimmy Durkin gave me a call, and they hired me as a contractor to cover the Niners and Raiders. And then after they were kicked out of the playoffs that year, I volunteered to write about the Vikings and Eagles, and that work kind of gained some popularity. And then they hired me full-time after that season.
And then finally, before we get on to the football, what is something that what's a piece of advice you might give to young kids coming up trying to get into the sports writing game?
Just be versatile. I think in this day and age, you have to be able to be good at multiple outlets. Like, you have to be a good podcaster, you have to be a good writer, you have to be good with video. You have to be good at multiple things. You can't just focus on one thing and think that's going to take you places. You have to be good everywhere and just continue to put out content and be consistent. I mean, that's the toughest part, even for guys like us that are in the game. Just be consistent with what you put out, and keep trying to put quality work out there.
Gotcha. So to that end, Ted, you wrote a great piece about Drake May and Jaden Daniels, and obviously in Commanders Lane is very important for us. We have our eye on that. Your piece was called Drake May or Jaden Daniels, What Film Shows the Most About These Two QB Prospects? Walking away, I know who you particularly like more from the film work there. So I kind of want you to touch on the piece and kind of talk about what you would do if you were Washington number 2. Who do you like better between the two candidates?
So to me, I think Drake May is the clear-cut quarterback 2. After watching the film and examining them closely, I would put Drake May closer to Caleb Williams than I do Jaden Daniels. I just think Drake May has all the tools you look for in a quarterback. I mean, the only real knock you have against him is his production dipped from last year to this year. But when you watch the film, it's clearly his environment affected his production. He didn't have a lot of good receivers to throw to, a ton of drop passes. It just seemed like his receivers and him were just couldn't be on the same page. And I don't know if that's a product of the quarterback or receiver, but it clearly wasn't. It just there was no chemistry there. It didn't really work. Protection was a problem as well. And he did get he did get sloppy at times. But I mean, I think that's just what happens. I think that would happen to a lot of quarterbacks in that situation where you have to deal with the leaky offensive line and just receivers that aren't where they need to be. So he got a little sloppy with his footwork at times, got a little sloppy with his decision making at times, but it just seemed like he had to score a lot of points every game to try to keep them in it. But I think as far as just looking at the traits, he has everything you want. Like he has elite arm talent. He could run. I mean, he's not a Jaden Daniels on the ground, but I mean, he could score a 60-yard touchdown if you need him to. So he's going to be a threat on the ground. He could run some option. He's going to be dangerous on scrambles. Not quite Jaden Daniels dangerous, but dangerous enough. And he could create plays outside of structure. I think he could clean up his footwork and mechanics a little bit. But I mean, he still has a pretty quick release, and he could put the ball anywhere you want it. And I like that he's already learning how to manipulate defenses with his eyes. And, I think having that type of creativity as a passer is so important in today's day and age.
Absolutely. I think we constantly look at like transferable skills and kind of like what they can project to in the NFL. Do you value a mobile quarterback? I know Drake May and Jaden Daniels are both mobile quarterbacks, but do you find that like maybe Jaden Daniels' skills, like I guess his mobility is a vital trait, right? But I guess do you value more like the aggressive passing nature of Drake May and his ball, like his arm talent? Do you value that more, or do you think like the mobility for Jaden Daniels potentially has higher upside? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think mobility is an extremely important trait to have in today's day and age. I mean, I think offensive lines aren't as good as they used to be. Defenses are extremely good at rushing the passer. You have to be able to get away from those pass rushers. And just being that statue quarterback, I mean, you can win that way. You can be an elite quarterback that way, but it takes a long time. You have to gain that type of mental mastery, like a Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. That
Absolutely.
takes a lot of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and people don't remember how long it took those guys to really develop into the quarterbacks that they are now. And having that mobility gives you a floor. It gives you something you can do to be successful early in your career, and it helps your offensive out when you can create those second reaction type of plays. But mobility is important, but it's a bar you cross. Like
Exactly.
for me, Drake May clears that bar by like you don't have to worry about that bar. He's a mobile quarterback. He's going to be dangerous on the ground, but Jaden Daniels takes that to an extra level. But is that extra level necessary to be good at NFL? Maybe not. But I mean, for Jaden Daniels, it's going to be important because the option is going to be a big part of his game, and that home run explosive ability is going to be important to him. But to be an elite quarterback, you don't necessarily need to be as explosive as he is.
Gotcha. The threshold of mobility. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is from DT in the chat. Just thought maybe you'd talk to some of the concerns you have, because we see these two being talked about all the time. And then I think people feel like there aren't any other concerns, but there certainly are.
Yeah, I think the weight threshold is important for Jaden Daniels. I think he needs to get bigger. And I think he has a frame to get bigger. It's not like a Bryce Young situation where he's just never going to be that big. I think Jaden Daniels has the frame to add some weight to him easily. I think he's probably going to add 10, 15 pounds in the next couple of years. So that's not a huge concern for me. But the hits are a concern because, I mean, he just took some vicious hits in college, and I think in NFL they're going to tell him like you got to learn how to get down, you got to learn how to slide here. But at the same time, there's also kind of like a sixth sense type of thing where Lamar Jackson, he just knows when these hits are coming, and he just falls down at the perfect time. So does he have that sixth sense, and does he know where that hit's coming from? Does he know when he's going to slide down. I think he'll do a better job of avoiding those hits that come straight at him. But it just seems like, Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson, they kind of have that sixth sense of knowing where that hit's coming from. And I question whether Jaden Daniels has that.
We've had some on here talk about Jaden and his lack of success with intermediate throws over the middle. Is that something that you see, or is that being overblown at this point?
It's definitely a concern because when you look at the percentages of over the middle passes, Jaden Daniels ranks very low from quarterbacks since 2015. I think he might be somewhere in the top 5 lowest percentage of throws intermediate over the middle. So it is a concern. He got better this season, and he made more throws in the middle. I think, he showed signs that he can anticipate those throws opening up. He made some really nice throws in the middle when he did, but there just wasn't enough of it on film. So I think if you're going to draft him, you are hoping that ascension keeps improving and he becomes a thrower that can hit the middle of the field. Otherwise, I mean, he can still thrive as a quarterback, not being a guy that hits the middle of the field very often. I mean, Russell Wilson made a whole career out of not throwing in the middle of the field. And I mean, quarterbacks have had success. I mean, Jalen Hurts doesn't throw in the middle of the field, but it does limit you. There is a limitation when you can't do that consistently.
And Ted, to that point, we keep hearing about like the quarterback class and potentially 4 quarterbacks going in the top 6. The assumption is maybe JJ McCarthy is creeping up and kind of flying up the draft boards. My question to you is, how do you feel about JJ McCarthy? And as a guy that studies film extensively, what's the dilemma between like projections and kind of looking at what he's already produced? Like, what are some of his strengths and where are some of the projections? What are you concerned about there regarding JJ McCarthy as well?
Yeah, I mean, McCarthy is a guy that, if I didn't hear any noise and I just was evaluating based on the film, I would give him more of a second round grade because there's a lot of unknown with JJ McCarthy. But at the same time, I understand the intrigue with JJ McCarthy because he shows all these high level traits, but he just shows it in very short spurts. And I think with Michigan, I didn't think it was because they didn't trust him to throw. I think Michigan actually had a very bad pass blocking offensive line, especially against some of the better teams. You could just see, their 2 tackles were just getting mauled, every play. So I think instead of putting him in that situation, instead of putting that offense in a situation where, they might take a sack and put themselves out of, a good third down situation or field goal position, it would rather just run the ball and trust that defense, which was a winning formula. They won a national championship. So with McCarthy, he has a very similar draft profile, and I'm not comparing the players, but a similar draft profile to Trey Lance, where they were in offenses and systems where they weren't asked to do a lot, but they showed very high level traits when they did. So, I could see why, a coach like Sean Payton would be very intrigued by J. McCarthy because they see these tools and they're like, I could work with that. I could develop that into an elite quarterback, or at least a quarterback that would work extremely well in my system.
Gotcha.
The free agency's been fast and furious. How have you felt about what the Commanders have done so far in Adam Peters' first year?
Okay, so you guys are gonna have to remind me about what. There's so much happening in free agency. That,
so we added
a whirlwind right now.
Yeah, we'll give you a little time. So we have 15 additional picks, or 15 additional additions to our team: Austin Eckler, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Cleveland Farrell, Dorrance Armstrong, very other long snappers. I don't know if you had any big ones, Doug, in regard to that. I guess my follow-up question would be, do you like those additions, or do you feel like maybe they're long? Oh, Zach Ertz as well. Are they long in the tooth, maybe concerned that maybe these players are more familiar as opposed to can still contribute next year? I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Without looking at the contracts, as long as those guys don't have long-term contracts and are not locked in, I think those are fine additions that will help your team out. Those are guys that will, help kind of usher in the next era and mentor some of those guys. Cleveland Farrell's a good run defender. Zach Ertz, he still has some juice left in the tank, but he's not the Zach Ertz of old. But he's a good leader that's going to help out that young tight end group. Bobby Wagner is long in the tooth. I mean, he's a big name, but he's not nowhere near the Bobby Wagner that we saw in Seattle in his first stint there. But again, he's going to be a guy that could help out those young linebackers. I think that's the idea with bringing these guys in. It doesn't sound like they made any huge, big splash free agent moves, but that's not really a bad thing when you consider where this team is where they are at right now. And I mean, you guys have lived through the Daniel Snyder era, where you're just signing guys to huge, ridiculous contracts, which, really handcuffs your team later down the line. So I think having some, making some modest free agent acquisitions that, where you're looking at, that won't handcuff you in the future it's probably a good thing for the team.
Gotcha.
Jeremy Chin was one of the other big ones though. So lots of 2-year contracts. Quickly before we get you out of here, Ted, I'm curious your thoughts about the Kingsbury and Anthony Lynn kind of marriage there on offense and what it might look like. And then we always ask everybody on their way out who they think that the Commanders will take it to.
Sorry, what was the last part of the question?
The last one is we always ask who do you think the Commanders should take it to?
Okay, got it. So with Kingsbury, I wasn't a huge fan of his offense. I had when he first entered the league, I was very excited for Kingsbury and curious to what his offense would look like. But I had a lot of criticisms of his offense with the Cardinals, with just kind of locking receivers into one place, not moving them around much. It just felt like his offense was like a big grab bag of plays. It didn't feel like a good, sequencing going on with this play calling. And they just relied a lot on quarterback scrambling. I mean, a lot of their offense was Kyler Murray running around, and you can't really live that way. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Daniels was the pick because they he values mobility so much and short passing more. And Jaden Daniels is actually a very accurate short passer. But I like combining Kingsbury with Anthony Lynn because Anthony Lynn's a run-game coordinator. He's from San Francisco, and he learned from Kyle Shanahan, who is probably the best play caller as far as learning how to sequence your play calls and calling plays systematically. So hopefully he picks some of that up from San Francisco, and he can help Kingsbury in that department and just kind of create a strong run game to go with that air raid-ish type of offense that Kingsbury runs. And as far as who I think that they should pick number 2, I think they should pick Dre May. I think he's clearly quarterback 2. And again, he's not explosive as Jaden Daniels on as far as mobility, but he clears that bar plenty.
Ted, I think I can speak for George when I say we could have done this all day, but it's a busy time of year, and we know that you are a busy man. So we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Ed. See you guys.
See you.